Let's continue building a product display and shopping cart project with React and TypeScript. Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. Today we will continue to apply many previous lessons from my TypeScript series in order to build a React and TypeScript product display and shopping cart project. And I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. This is part 2 and also the last part of the final project in my TypeScript series. If you haven't watched part 1 or the rest of the series, there's a link in the description to the full playlist and course resources. Let's take a quick look at this project if you haven't seen it before. We're going to add a couple of things to the cart. We can see the footer update. We also see the header update. Then we can view the cart and we see the items in the cart. We can actually add more items once we're in the cart and see these line items. And then we can place an order. And I'm just going to leave that code up to you because placing an order, processing cards, that usually gets into a third-party integration, PayPal, Stripe, whatever you want to do there. But I'll just clear out the cart and say thank you for your order in this project. So when we go back to view products, then of course they have been removed. But you can toggle back and forth with this button in the header. So that is our simple cart. I'm going to drag the browser over here to the right side of the screen just so I can see Visual Studio Code. And now I've got my Lesson 17 folder open. Now this is the completed code from Lesson 16, and I just created a new folder. You may want to continue to work in the same folder you were already in from the previous lesson. Now we did the heavy lifting in part 1 where we set up a context for both the products and the cart. So we have our products provider.tsx and we have our cart provider.tsx. Today we'll create all of the app components we need to complete the project. We already have the component directory right here. So now that I've highlighted that, let me go ahead and create a few components. We're going to have a header.tsx. We're also going to have a footer.tsx. We will have a ProductList.tsx, and let's go ahead and create a cart.tsx. Now these aren't all of the components we'll need, but it will give us a good start, and that's everything we're going to need to import into the app, which will be the parent component. So I'll just go into the header first, and I'll type RAFCE because we have the ES7 React snippets installed, or at least I do. If you don't, I recommend those. And now that I have this header, I'll just save this and I'll move on and do the same for the footer and save. And then we can do the same for the product list. And then we can do the same for the cart. Now that we have those, we can move over to the app.tsx. I'm going to quickly import all of these. So we have header, and then we'll have the footer. That's not exactly where I needed the return. We'll have the footer after that. So import footer, and it comes from the components. After that, we will import the cart. And after that, let's also import the product list. And now we can use these in the component, but I do want to import the useState hook as well because we are going to use that to toggle between the views. So now with the imports complete, let's go ahead and apply the useState hook here. So I'll say const. I'm going to call this viewCart with camel case, and then I'll say set viewCart. And we're just going to set this equal to useState. Now we could say a type right here, or if we just put in the Boolean, it's going to, of course, infer what type it is as well. I'll mouse back over and see if we get that inference. Yep, there we have viewCart Boolean. But you could provide that here with the arrows, just like that. Now I'm going to define some page content, and that's exactly what I'll call this, and this is what we will render. But this is going to be based on what the viewCart value is. So I'm going to use a ternary here. So if viewCart is true, we're going to render the cart component. And if it's not true, we're going to render the product list component. And now we have our page content. So after that, let's create some content to go along with it where we wrap the page content in the header and the footer. So now I'll say const content, set this equal to, and I'll use parentheses so we can use multiple lines here. I'll start out with a fragment. Now inside the fragment, I'm going to use the header component, but I need a capital H. There we go. We're going to pass down props. So I'll have the view cart, set that equal to view cart. And then we're also going to have set view cart. I'll set that equal to set view cart. And now that we have that, let's close that out. And now let's put the page content that we created above. So we're determining which we're going to render here, which would essentially be the main element of the page. That's either going to be the cart or the product list. And then we can wrap this in the footer. And the footer just needs to receive the view cart value because it's going to do something a little bit different. It will not need to toggle like the header does, where we actually have that button. Okay, let's scroll just so we can see the rest of this. And really here, instead of the return with the parentheses, now we can just return the content. And we have a red squiggly here for view cart. Let's see what it says. View cart Boolean is not assignable to type intrinsic attributes. Well, no worries, because that is recognizing something from the header and the footer, and we will fix that as we go. But this is the code that we need here inside of the app component. So I'm just going to save that for now. We'll come back and check on this after we go ahead and complete the header and the footer. Let's move on to the header now. Okay, the header is receiving props. So let's define a props type at the top. So I'll say type, and I'll just call this props type. And I will set this equal to an object there that has view cart, and that is a Boolean. And after that, we'll also be receiving set view cart. Now, what is set view cart? It's a setter essentially from the useState hook. So let's go back and let's get the type from the app component where we have it. And if we mouse over, we can see it is react.dispatch and then react.setStateAction and a Boolean. So we can just highlight all of that and copy with Control C. Now let's go back to the header and we can put that right in here. And now we can destructure our props. So we're going to get the view cart and the set view cart. And after that, we can say what type it is. So it will be our props type. And now that looks okay. And I think if we go back and check, let's confirm. No, we still have a problem with the footer. That's why app was still red over here, or it's red up here at the top. But look, the header no longer has that red squiggly line because we've set up the props correctly. So we'll do the same with the footer when it comes time. Now let's go ahead and define some content for our header. So I'll say const content, and I'll set this equal to a couple of parentheses again so we can use multiple lines. And I'm going to put in a header element. And there we go. Now that we've got the header element, I want to add a class here. So class name equals, and this is just going to be header. Now this relates to the CSS that I'm providing for this tutorial. If you want to use your own, that's fine too. You can change it in the index.css file. Okay, inside of the header, we want a div, and let's give this a class name, and I'll just use the Emmet shortcut here with the dot and 2 underscores, and I'll say title-bar. Press tab. Now we've got the class name on there. And now inside of this div, I'm going to use an H1, and I'm going to put Acme Co. for the header. That's just the company name. And then after that, I want one more div, and I'm going to give this a class name of header 2 underscores and price dash box. Press tab, and we're good. Now I want 2 paragraphs inside of this. So here's my first paragraph, and I'm going to say total items and give a colon. Now we're not going to pull that in yet, but we will in just a little bit. Second paragraph, I'm going to say total price and put a colon here. Now if I save, let me drag this back over so you can see what I'm working on. Here's our company name, Acme Co. Here's what I put, total items and total price. Now clearly we're going to pull in some information here from our context. And then we have a button here for the view cart toggle, but that is in a separate component. And we're going to create a nav component and import it in here. So let's create that nav component. It's just nav.tsx. Now RAFCE, and press tab, and we have our basic nav component. And nav is going to receive the same props. We're just passing those down from the app component to the header component, right on down to the nav component. And because of that, we can just copy this props type. We could actually define the props type somewhere else and just import it if we want to, but it's not that big. It's easy to copy. And I also like having it in the component so it's a quick and easy reference when you're looking at props type as well. So you can do it whichever way you prefer. I'm just going to paste in the props type here also. And I really could go back to that header because we're passing in the same props too. So just copy this line, go back to the nav, and put it right here inside of the parentheses. Now, easily a store nav could have many more things inside of it. We're just going to put in our button that toggles between the two views. So I'm going to define the button, say const button, set that equal to view cart with a ternary here. So what we're doing is checking the value of view cart, and then we'll say if it's true, we're going to put a button or return a button, and it'll have this on click, and we'll put in an anonymous function, and then we'll say set view cart, and it will be false. And then after that, let's close this out, and we can say view products. So that's if it's true. I'm going to press Alt-Z so it wraps down as well. But if it is false, then we'll have the colon here. So we're just completing the ternary. We'll have a button once again with the on click, set that equal to an anonymous function with set view cart, which would be true. And so now we'll say view cart. And that really completes what we need for our button. So we're just defining the button based on the view cart value. After that, let's create some content once again. So I'll say const content equals with parentheses, and I'll use a nav element. Press tab, and after I've got the nav element, I meant to put a class on that. Say class name equals nav. And then inside of the nav element, we're just going to have our button to render. So now we can just return the content we created here and save our nav component. I'm going to put in a couple of blank lines just to make it a little cleaner. And after that save, let's go back to the header and let's import the nav at the top. So now we're going to import nav. And after we have the nav imported, we can use it inside of the header, and we're going to put it below the div we created here that has the company name and the total items and price. So just below this div, we'll say nav, and then we'll pass in everything that we were passing along. So the view cart equals view cart, and set view cart equals set view cart. After that, we can just close out the component right there, and we've completed the header. Well, I may have said that too soon because we didn't return that content yet that we created above. Now we have completed the header. Let me add that extra space for some formatting, but it is now good to go. Well, I am jumping the gun just a bit when I say it is completed, and by jumping the gun, that's an expression that says I'm a little bit ahead of myself, because what we didn't do was pull in that context information that we need from the cart context. And we can't do that yet because we need to create a custom hook to do that. And so I'm going to highlight this source directory, and I'm going to create a new directory inside of it called hooks. And now that I've done that, I'll go ahead and create a file here called useCart.tsx. Now this is a very simple hook. We'll just import the use context, and that comes from React. After that, we can go ahead and import our cart context that we created inside of our cart provider.tsx. And then we're going to import the use cart context type that we also defined inside of that cart provider file. Now that we have those three imports, we'll just say const use cart, set this equal to a function, and this function is going to return the use cart context type that we've already previously defined. Now inside of this, all we need to do is say return use context, and we pass in the cart context that we created. Now here at the bottom, you could say export as you define that, or you could put a default, and I'm just going to put a default here. So I'll say export default use cart. And now this custom hook is ready to go. The nice thing about this is now we'll just need to import useCart, and we can begin to use it rather than importing a couple of things that you would need to do with the use context hook here. So it just kind of simplifies that for us. So now let's go back to the header, and we'll go ahead and use our useCart custom hook that provides the context. So inside of the header now, at the top, we want to import useCart. And then just inside of the component, I'll put it right at the top, I'm going to say const, and we're going to get the total items. We don't have to bring in everything, just what we want from the context, and the total price. And this is going to equal useCart. Now, we've already created those inside of the context, so we can mouse over and we can see that total items is a number. Total price is that formatted string that already has the $sign. So now we can just use these inside of our component. We did all of the hard work inside of the context itself in the previous lesson. So now we'll just go total, whoops, we need the curly brace, total price, and save. And now the header is actually complete with the data we needed from the cart context as well, so it can display the correct information. Now the footer is actually easier than the header, so let's go ahead and complete that. We've already got everything we need, so we'll just say import useCart. And after that, inside of the footer, or we need to define that props type again, so we're going to say type props type, but it doesn't have as much in it. It just has the view cart, really. So we can just say view cart, and that's a Boolean. And after that, we can say we're going to receive the structure, essentially the view cart right here. And this is going to be the props type. And then just inside of the component, let's once again use cart. We'll say const, and we'll get our total items and total price once again. And that will both be set equal to useCart. After we have that, let's define the year because we want to display a copyright in our footer. And yes, this is going to be a number type, and we'll just set this equal to a new date, and we'll get full year. And that way you don't have to update the website every year. It's going to automatically figure out what the year is for you. Now let's define page content. This will be the biggest part of the footer, really. So we'll say const page content. Let's set this equal to a ternary once again that looks at that view cart value. And here, if this is true, we're going to display a line that says shopping cart, and then the copyright symbol, that's an HTML entity there. And then we can put in that year value we defined above. But if it is false, then we're going to provide a parentheses here so we can use multiple lines. I'll use a fragment, and inside of the fragment, I'm going to put in 3 different paragraphs. So I'm going to have total items, and here we'll put in the total items value. And after that, let me just copy this down with Shift Alt and the down arrow twice. So after total items, we're also going to have total, let me undo that. And what I should have done is highlight items and then press Control D, and I got the next items, and I can just type price once. There we go. And then finally, we'll have shopping cart here at the bottom, and this should also have the year and everything that was basically up here. So I could just copy this, because remember, this won't show, it's a ternary. So if view cart's true, it's just going to see this line. Otherwise it sees this line. So essentially we're providing this information either way. And save, and now it's almost finished, but in the return, well, let's go ahead and create a content and not just put it in the return. So I'll say const content, set this equal to, once again, parentheses, a footer element that has a class name of footer, and then inside of this, we'll put the page content. And now that we have that, we'll just return that content once again. So highlight that and change it to content. Now the footer is complete, and we have brought in the data that we need from the cart context as well. With that complete, let's go ahead and open up a terminal window with Control and the backtick, and I'm going to type npm run dev to launch the project, and we can see what it looks like so far. I'm going to press Control and click on that local host. Let's do that, and it launched it. And here we go. We have got our header with the product list. It just says product list inside of a div right now. And we have our footer. And if we press the view cart button, it should toggle over and it shows the cart. And we can see our footer change to just show the shopping cart. And we see some information here at the top too. Now, total price doesn't have anything in it right now. Total items is 0. That's okay. And it shows the cart. When we come back, the same thing here at the top. So we're getting the expected results, but we have a little bit more to go yet. So let's close the terminal, and now let's move on to the product list. And speaking of products, we're not really pulling in those products. I didn't start up the JSON server like we used in the previous tutorial. And remember, I said if you wanted to deploy this after developing with JSON server, it might be easier just to go ahead and put these items in here with hard code. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to comment out the initial state inside of the products provider. I'm going to highlight all of this as far as the initial state and uncomment it. And then we won't really need the area that has the use effect. I did want to show how to do that because it contained the promise that we worked with, and that reviewed part of what we learned in the TypeScript series. But overall, we're not going to need to use that when we hard code those items in. So I'll just highlight the use effect and I will comment that out and save as well. So no need for that unless you want to use the JSON server right now. Otherwise, you can just use these hard-coded items here in your context, and that would be easier to deploy this example project with. Okay, now going back to the products list, we need to import that useCart hook at the top, and I just typed over something. There we go. Not to type over the product list, but we need to import the useCart hook. And then I'll just press tab and we import that, but we also need a useProducts hook. So let's go back to our hooks directory and we'll create this useProducts.tsx. And now we have this empty file. I'm going to go to useCart actually, Control A to highlight it all, Control C to copy. Now just go into the useProducts file and paste it. And we can just change the few things that we need to change when we create this hook. Basically, everywhere it says cart, we need to change to products. So I've highlighted cart, and now I can see all of these on the screen, but just to make sure, I'll Control D as I select to make sure I'm selecting the right things. And there I've selected all instances with Control D one at a time. Now I'll type products, and it changes all of those over to products. And we've basically created our custom hook for use products because we need use context. We need the use products context type, we need the products context itself, and that is what we're returning then, is the products context. So after I save that, it's ready to go, and we can go back to the products list. Now at the top, we will import use products from that same hooks directory, and we're also going to need to import the use products context type. It looks like I could press Alt-Z just to wrap that, and then I'll tab to the end of the line, and we're ready to start bringing that information into the component. So here I'm going to have const, and I'm going to bring in dispatch, also the reducer underscore actions, and cart from our use cart. So different things than I brought in to the header or the footer, but they're all available from that use cart context. Then I'm going to bring in products, and that's really all you can get from the use products custom hook that is the use or the products context itself. So now that we have the information, let's go ahead and create some page content here as well. And I'm going to say let page content. And of course, if you ever reassign, you need to use let instead of const. And this is going to be a React element, and I want to press tab so it goes ahead and brings that import in up here at the top as well. Now that we know this is a React element, we're going to use the or symbol and say, or it might be an array of React elements. And then we can set this equal to, and for now, let's set it equal to a paragraph that says loading. And that just means we're, loading our products. So really, when you have those hard-coded in, this won't be an issue. But if you were fetching those from somewhere, such as we showed with the useEffect hook, or if you used React Query, of course, you might have a hook that would provide the loading state. But we're just providing this loading information here. And now if we have products, so I want to say if, and then I'll check the products and check the length property. And notice I used optional chaining there to say, if there is a length, essentially. Now we can reassign that page content value. Let me scroll for just a little more room because this is going to take a little bit of space, and I'll separate it from the return as well. Okay, here I'll say page content. I'm going to set this equal to the products, and we're going to map over the products. So at this point, we'll say for each product inside of the map, and then we need to define something. We're going to define in cart to see if it is in the cart. If you remember, when we added a product to the cart, it instantly showed up on the product display that it was in the cart and it had a check mark. So here we're going to say if in cart, and this is a Boolean, and now we'll set this equal to our cart, which remember is our sorted cart items from the context, and that's what we're getting from useCart. Now we can use the sum method, and so we'll look at an item or each item one at a time. And we'll say if the item.skew is strict equals, which is 3 equal sign. Notice I'm using font ligatures, so they're linked together there, is equal to the product skew. Then we have our in cart as true, which is a Boolean, because sum will check if any one of these actually is true. We'll say, yes, it is in the cart. And now we still need a return for our map method here. So now we'll provide the return, and I'll use parentheses, and we're going to use the product component, but we haven't created a product component yet. So this would be each product as we map over. Let's go ahead and create that now. And we'll just say product.tsx. And here we can just say RAFCE for now. Create a simple component for the product. Now back in the products list, we'll go ahead and create the full product and what we're going to pass in. And then we'll, of course, fix those props as we go. The product itself is going to receive a key as we map over. You need to do that in React, and this would be equal to the product.skew. After that, we'll go ahead and provide the product object itself. So we'll have product, and then we'll have dispatch that we received from that context. Now, dispatch does not have to worry about the referential equality because it already is. So we don't need to memoize it. It's already going to be equal to that. And then if you remember, as we set up the reducer actions inside of our cart context, we did memoize those. So we don't have to worry about these causing another render either. Now this product object is something we will have to deal with if we're talking about optimizations. And then in cart is a Boolean here, and we'll just pass down the in cart value as well. Okay, after that, we still need to close the product component. We've done that, and now this is what is being returned for each product as we map through the products here and create the page content. Now we do have the squiggly line, of course, because once again, these props aren't really matching up, and it looks like we didn't import product yet at the top. So let's do that as well. So we'll say import product. And now that we have that, we're still, yes, we're going to get something here because the props aren't matching up yet, but we'll go ahead and fix that inside of the product component. Now, after we've created this content, if we have products, we reassign content, we still want to create a content variable below. So I'll say const content, and I'll set this equal to, once again, using parentheses, and I'm going to have a main element with a class name. So I'll just say main, and then the class would be main. It's also going to have a second class, which is main, 2 dashes, and products. Press tab, and yes, we've got both of those classes assigned now. And then inside of this main element will be that page content we created, and then our return will just have content. Okay, we've created the product list component, and it maps over each of the products and displays those, but we are not finished yet with the product component itself. We have quite a ways to go there, actually. So let's go ahead and do that. At the very top, we have a few imports. We're going to need to import product type that comes from our products provider we have previously created. We also need to import a reducer action type that we had previously created, and we also need reducer action here. I'm going to press Alt-Z to get that to wrap down as well, and both of those come from the cart provider. Now, product is receiving quite a few props, so let's define our props type here for product. And here we'll start out with our product, and it's going to be the product type that was previously defined. Then we have dispatch. Now we're going to have to get dispatch's type. So let's go back to the other components that had dispatch where we're passing that down. And it looks like we bring it in here. Yes, if we mouse over dispatch, we can see it is React. Oh, I missed it. It is React.dispatch, and then it's the reducer action there. So we can copy that, go back to the product itself, Paste that type right there. And after that, we need our reducer underscore actions. And this is the reducer action type that we had previously defined. And then we have in cart, which is a Boolean. And I know from one tutorial to the next, it may be hard to remember, but again, we did that heavy lifting in the first part of this project, the first tutorial, where we define these types. So you could go back and reference these in the appropriate context, whether it's the cart, where dispatch and reducer actions is coming from, or the product type, where it's coming from the products provider. And now we still need to destructure all of these that are being passed into the component. So we'll have product and dispatch and reducer underscore actions and in cart. Now we need to assign the type here, and it is going to be the props type that we just defined above. But let's go ahead and provide a return type as well. So here, this is going to be a React element that is returned. And if I do that and press tab, yes, it imports the React element at the top as well. Okay, here's a discussion that is specific to using Vite with our project. And we've been using Vite throughout this tutorial series. So when we do this, we might have to work with dynamic images differently. And it's in a good way because this way also works with Create React App. But you might have been used to an old way that won't work with Vite, even though it did work with Create React App. So in the past, you might have said something like const image, and we'll say this is a string. And then we would set it equal to require, which is something we would usually see with Node. And then we would specify the images. So here I would say 2 dots to go up out of this directory, the components directory, and a slash, and then into the images directory. And if we look over here, I've provided images already in a directory inside of the source directory. We have the images directory, and we have our different product images. And we want to dynamically create this. So from there, we would go ahead and provide the next slash that's needed. And I had the wrong direction for the slash. Let me just fix that real quick. Slash images, there we go. And from there, we would say slash, and I would say product.sku. So we would get the actual item number that we needed, and then have .jpeg. Now, this would probably work for the old way of doing things. And here we have require, and of course, TypeScript doesn't like that. We would need some type definition that would come from Node as well. This is the old way of doing this, and it won't work with Vite. It just simply won't. So let's go ahead and figure out a better way of doing this that will work with both Create React App and Vite. And what we're going to do is define a new URL object. And here we're going to pass in, I'll start with the backtick again and use a template literal and go images. And after images, we're going to have the slash $, I'll say product.sku once again, and then we'll have .jpg. So we've created a URL from that, but we're not quite finished. And you could MD in the new URL or the URL object to see what this is. But you might also want to look at import.meta, and there's an MDN page on that also. And then I'm going to say .url. So we're getting that specific data, but we're not finished yet. We don't really want the object. Notice image here is supposed to be a string that we're dynamically creating from this data. So what I need to get that string is just the href value from that object. So now that will return a string that we can refer to the image, and yet when we build our project with Vite, it is still going to point to the correct image that we are dynamically referring to. So this might help you out if you were not aware of that. And really, to compare, we could put in a console log, and I'll just leave this in here, image, and you'll see it in dev mode, and it will have one address. And then, of course, after you build your project into production, then you could see this console log value again in the console, and you will see that it has a completely different address. But Vite recognizes that, and this will work as far as I know with Create React App as well. Okay, after that, let's go ahead and define our onAddToCart function. So I'm going to say const onAddToCart because we're going to need that for these products, or for each product because we're in the product component. So we have onAddToCart. Now that we have our arrows here, actually, instead of the curly braces that I would normally do here, I'm just going to make this a one-liner. So really the curly braces would break it down to another line. I'm just going to start right here and just go with dispatch, parentheses. Now I can say the type and say reducer actions. And then I can use dot notation to get that autocomplete, and I want the add type. And after that, I can specify the payload. And here I'm going to spread in the product. And then I'm going to provide a quantity of 1 because we really need to provide all of the different properties of the product. Now, when we add this and we look back at the reducer, we're not going to be looking at this add to cart quantity because it's always going to be 1. But if we don't provide this here, we would get an error. And I didn't want to make the quantity optional or any of those different properties optional. So you could look at different ways of doing that, but that's how I'm putting it together. Let's also define the item in cart. So I'll say item in cart, and this will determine what we display, whether it is in the cart already or not. So we'll look at that in cart value. And now I'll use a ternary here once again, and I'm going to put some single quotes, and I'm going to copy this in because I've got a special character or two. So I've got an arrow and a check mark that I got as an emoji. But this is what I want to display if it is in the cart. And you could copy that out of my source code, or you could use your own emojis or arrows or whatever you want to. If it's not in the cart, we'll just make it null and we won't display anything. Now let's scroll for some more room and let's define some content that we will be able to return. So I'll say const content, and I'm going to set this equal to, and I could once again provide parentheses here, but I don't think I really need to because it's going to be wrapped in a parent component. So let me go ahead and just Control Z to undo those parentheses. And I'll just break this down to the next line and say this is an article element. And I'm going to give this a class of product. Now inside of the article element, we're going to have an H3. And then inside of that for its content will be the product.name value. And then after the H3, we'll go ahead and use our image. And so we'll need an image element, and this is going to have a class of product, 2 underscores, and img. And then we need to provide a source value. Well, we've already kind of defined that above, so all we have to do is say it is the image. And then for the alt, this could once again be the product name. So I'll just copy this and put it right here. And then the class name is product image. That all looks good. Underneath this, let's put a paragraph. Now inside this paragraph, here we're going to do something just a little different. And this is going to give us our format for what we're going to display here. So I'm going to say new international, which is INTL with a capital I, dot number format. Here I'm going to say that this number format is English US. Of course, you could change this if you prefer something different there. And I'll say the style is going to be currency, and then a comma, and then currency as a property, and I'll say USD for US dollar. Now, once we get to the end of that, here at the end of the parentheses, I'm going to say dot format. And then inside of this, we're going to pass in the product dot price. So we're formatting the product price, much like we did the total price that we were passing from the cart context. But here, this is just for each individual product. So we just kind of need to format this as we go, and we're doing that here. And then after that, we need to go ahead and provide something else. So we're closing that out, but I want to show the item in cart. So we get that check mark beside the price if it is in the cart. Okay, after that, we need one more thing, and that is the button. And then we need to put an on click on this button so we can add it to the cart. So this is going to get the on add to cart function for the on click. And we'll say add, let's go lowercase there, add to cart. And that defines the content all inside of this article element. And then for the return, should just be the content itself. Okay, I'd like to check our progress in the browser, but before we do that, we need to remember to wrap our app with the providers we have created, and that's something that's easy to forget. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll actually need to import those first, so I'll say import cart provider, and I am in the main.tsx file, which in Vite is similar to the index.js if you use create React app. So this is main.tsx. So we've imported the cart provider, and now let's import the products provider as well. You'll see it down here in the list. Now that we have both of those, we're just going to wrap the app component in both of them. So I'll start with the products provider and press tab. And now I'm just going to put the app inside of both of these when we finish. So now I'm going to say cart provider, press tab again. Now that I have both of those, I'll just go ahead and highlight the app, Control X to cut it out, paste it in so it is wrapped inside of both of those. Now with providers, like context providers as these are, you don't have to wrap the entire app in those. Maybe you're creating a context that just a single part of your app needs, maybe the user info or user settings, something like that, and you would have a provider for that and you would just wrap those components specifically with that provider. For this example, just wrapping the entire app in both the products provider and the cart provider. Okay, now that we have completed that, we could go back to the product list that we completed or the product. Here's where we were there. But what we need to do really is go ahead and take a look at our browser and see how it's going over here. So I'll drag this to the left, and it looks like, yep, it's compared to our previous example that I was showing at the beginning of the video. Now this is the one we're working on, and we're showing all the products as well. It looks just like it. We have the zeros over here expected for the total price, the total items. Everything's good there. We just don't have anything for the cart yet. We still just have the word cart here. So we need to complete that. With the product display working, let's now move on to the cart itself. So we'll go to cart.tsx. At the top of the cart, we have a few imports to take care of. So we'll start off by importing the cart context. So we'll say import useCart and press tab. Once we're at the end of that, we can also import the useState hook that we're going to use just to confirm we've placed an order here. And after that, we need a CartLineItem component, and we don't have that yet. So let's go ahead and create that component. It's CartLineItem, all camel case, starting with a capital C, .tsx. Now I'll just use RAFCE with my ES7 React snippets to go ahead and create that simple component for now. And of course, we'll come back and add more details. But we need to import it here. So let's go ahead and import CartLineItem as well. Now we have all of our imports. Now let's go ahead and set up the useState here at the top. So I'll say const, this will be confirm and set confirm. And we'll set this equal to useState. Once again, you could go ahead and specifically say this is Boolean, or you could let TypeScript just infer. We'll go ahead and put the Boolean here as well. And now after the useState for confirm, we need to use that useCart hook to bring in the context, and we need everything for our cart. So I'll say const, we'll have our dispatch, then we'll have our reducer underscore actions. Let's have the total items. Let's also have the total price, and let's get the sorted cart itself. I'll press Alt-Z to wrap this down to the next line. We'll set all of this equal to useCart. Now we've got all of the data we need. Let's create a simple function here called onSubmitOrder, so we can go ahead and at least have that submit button submit and clear out the cart. And inside of our onSubmitOrder, we're going to use the dispatch. And anytime we need to use the dispatch, of course, then we have to provide the type, and this is going to be reducer underscore actions, and then we can use that autocomplete with the dot notation, and we get submit. After that, I also want to do the set confirm that we just defined above with useState, and I'm going to set that to true. Now we have some page content to define, and it's going to take up some space. So I'll say const page content, and I'll set this equal to, and I'm going to look at that confirm we have as a Boolean, and I'll use a ternary. And so I'll just indent in. I'm going to scroll up since I said it was going to take up some space. We'll start off with an H2. And really, then if confirm is true, in other words, we've placed the order, we'll just give a thank you for your order statement here. But if it's false, this would be the other part of the ternary. We'll start out with a fragment, and then we can put everything inside of this opening and closing fragment. So I'll have an H2, and let's give it a class of off screen, which, as the name indicates, this makes it shift off the screen, but it's still good to have this. So we're just having the subheading there for the cart, but you will not see that on the screen. Then I'm going to have an unordered list, give it a class name of cart, and then inside of this unordered list, we're going to map over the cart. So we'll say cart that we get from our context dot map, and now we'll have cart items. So for each item, now remember, we need to return inside of this map. So here I'm going to say return, use parentheses so we can use multiple lines. We're going to use our CartLineItem component, but we don't want to close it out here. We have props to pass down just like we did for the product. So the key is going to equal the item.skew, and then the next thing would be the item object itself that we'll pass down. And then we also want dispatch, which remember, it already has referential equality, so it will not cause a re-render. We will have to handle that item object. And then the reducer underscore actions, which again, we did memoize already inside of the context, so it will not cause a re-render either. Okay, after that, we'll have our closing slash and greater than sign, and we've closed out our CartLineItem component. We'll have the underscore here on the item for now, but we will fix that when we get to the CartLineItem component itself. So we mapped over everything and we've created this list of cart items essentially. But we're not quite finished because we also want to provide some totals here after the unordered list. So let's provide a div. I want lowercase. Let's give this div a class name of cart 2 underscores totals. And then inside of the div, we're going to have some paragraphs. So the first paragraph is going to have total items. And here we will use the total items value from context. And now I'll just copy this down with Shift Alt and the down arrow instead of items. And I'll highlight the first one, Control D to get the second one, type price. So now we have total items and total price. Then we're going to have a button. And this button is going to have a class that is cart 2 underscores submit. And on the button, we're going to say place order. But we also need to apply a couple of other things to this button. So we're going to have disabled set equal to the opposite. So use the bang operator there, the exclamation mark, of total items, which means essentially if there are no items, the disabled will be set to true, and so you won't be able to click the place order button if there's no items in the cart. Then we'll also have an on click, and we'll set this equal to that on submit order function that we created above. Now, after all of that, let's come down here to the closing part of the fragment. I'll give it just a little bit of room. I'll tab in. I'm going to create content. Looks like I tabbed too far, but that should adjust here after I go ahead and finish this. I'm going to return a main element, and it's going to have a class name of main and also of main, 2 dashes, and cart. And then inside of this main element is where we're going to return the page content. When I save, yes, that shifted back to where it should be. Now we have our return statement, which once again should just be the content itself. So now we've completed the cart. We haven't completed the cart line item yet, but everything looks good here. We're providing this extra information at the bottom of the cart after the cart line items. And now we, of course, need to fix our cart line item to get TypeScript to not give us this red squiggly mark under item here, but everything is as we expect it to be. So now let's go over to our cart line item component, and we once again have a few imports at the top as we begin. So I'll say import, we'll import our cart item type, and after we get the cart item type that was previously created, we'll also import the reducer action once again, and I need the one that comes from the context cart provider. And after that, we're also going to import. I need to have my fingers on the right keys and also be on the right line. There we go. Import reducer action type that will come from the cart provider. Okay, with those three imports, we're ready to start out, and we'll define our props type for this component. Now let's have an item, and this will be the cart item type that we already brought in. And after the item, we're going to have the dispatch. And remember how we got that before? We can do that again. We're also going to have the reducer underscore actions, and that would be the reducer action type right here. Okay, we can save this, but let's go get that dispatch again. So here, if we mouse over dispatch, here's the type. It is react.dispatch, and it has the reducer action. So we'll copy that, go back to the CartLineItem, and paste that right in. And now the component needs to receive those props, so let's destructure those here. We have item, dispatch, and reducer underscore actions. And after that, we can just set that to the props type that we just defined, Alt-Z to make all of this wrap down. And now we once again have the same image, dynamic image, essentially, that we did before. So we could just kind of go back to our product and look where we got that dynamic image defined here. And I can just copy this. And you could use the console log statement again if you want to. Again, I'm leaving that in there just so you could see how it works from dev mode to production and see how it changes. That works with Vite for sure. I'll paste that in. I'll go ahead and remove the console log here, as you probably don't want it in both places. But notice now we're not using product here. We're using item instead. So I need to copy that and replace product with item.skew. Okay, now we have just a few more calculations for our cart line items. So let's start off with the line total, and this is going to be a number, so I'll go ahead and spell that out. And this would be the item.quantity times the item.price. This is something we're not keeping in context. This is something we're just showing with the line item. So we're calculating it right here. It's not really an expensive function. It's not something I would go ahead and bring in use memo to MemoWise, but it's just a quick calculation. The same thing here with how we create the options in the drop menu. So I'm going to call this highest quantity, and normally it would be 20. So this is a number, and I'll set it equal to 20, but if 20 is greater than the item.quantity, so it's starting out here with a conditional, and that means we're going to have a ternary. So if 20 is greater than the item.quantity, we'll make 20 the highest quantity that you can choose in the cart. Remember, there's that drop menu where you can change the quantity, and so it would go from 1 to 20 in that case. But otherwise, if the item quantity is higher, then of course we need that to go higher. So we'll just set it to the item quantity being the max there for the highest quantity. Now let's go ahead and create those option values for that select dropdown. So I'll say const option values, and this would be an array of numbers, Now here, I'll just create an array, and we will spread an array, and we'll pass in the highest quantity, and then we'll say dot keys. And now after this, we can use a little bit more dot notation. We'll just map over it, and then we'll say basically for each integer, I'll just use I for that, we'll say I plus 1, because otherwise it would start at 0, and we don't want that. So this would be like 1 to 20, for example, or if we had a higher quantity, it would be 1 to whatever that highest quantity is. And again, I don't consider any of these to be expensive calculations that I would need to MemoWise. Now finally, let's create the options. And this would be a React element. So let's go ahead and hit tab with that and make sure it has imported at the top. And there we have React element. But then we want this to be an array of React elements, actually. We'll set this equal to our option values. Remember, this is an array of numbers that we have up above. Let's map over that and say for each value. And then we can go ahead and have our curly braces. Now, since we did the curly braces, instead of making it a one-liner, we need the return. And this will be an option element. And then we'll have a key. Let's set this key equal to a template literal, and here we're going to say OPT, have a $sign, and pass in that value. So that is the key as we map over these. And then we'll have an actual value, which will be equal to the val. And then we can close that out. And then we want to display the value in the option dropdown as well. I know that's a little bit there as we create that select dropdown, but really it's not an expensive calculation, at least in my mind. And I don't really think it is. It's nothing that would slow your computer down. It happens very fast. So from there, we need an onChangeQuantity function. So we'll say onChangeQuantity, and this is going to equal a function that receives an event. Now this event is a change event. So I want to hit tab here so it imports that at the top as well. And it will be for an HTML select element. I can press tab there as well. Now I've got it. Now that I have that, let's go ahead and provide the arrow for the function. And inside the function, we're going to use dispatch. And I can put the curly braces here, and then we can just specify the type. And the type is going to need the reducer actions that we imported, and we need that auto completion with the dot notation. We get quantity. And on the next line, we can specify the payload. And the payload, we have an object here. We spread in the items, so we make sure we get all of the properties, and then we write over what we want to change, which is the quantity. We need to specify this as a number, an e.target.value. But we're not quite finished yet. We've defined these, we haven't used them yet, and we have one more function, and this is for the remove. So now we'll say const on remove from cart. We'll set this equal to a function, but no event needed there. And now we can make this a one-liner. So I'll just go ahead and start with dispatch right here, and I'll break the dispatch down onto separate lines again. So we have type, reducer underscore actions, auto completion with the dot notation, and we can choose remove. And then we also have the payload, and here curly braces, spread in the item. And really, we don't even need to spread in the item. I need to stop and think about that. Or we don't really need the curly braces even. We could just say payload item. This is the item we're passing along that we want removed. And of course, we'll just grab the ID out of that item when we get to the reducer. If, for example, we try to just provide the ID here, you can see TypeScript won't like that. It expects all of the properties the way we set this up. And again, you could do that differently, but I wanted to require all of the properties in some areas. If you had a huge object, you probably wouldn't want to pass that object into everything where you only needed one of the property values. But here we've only got 3 or 4 properties. Okay, let's scroll for some more room, because as we create this content, it's going to be rather large here. And we'll say const content, set this equal to, we'll have our parentheses. Now let's start off with a list item, because that's what we have. We have this list that is being mapped over, and the class is going to be cart2_item. Press tab, and now inside of this cart item, we're going to use our image element. We have a class name here that is cart2_img, but it's also going to need a source, which just like before is going to be set equal to the img for the image. Go ahead and set the alt equal to the item.name, and that's all we need for the image. So after the image element, let's create a div. And this div is going to have, well, let's press tab here. This div is going to have an aria-label that we can set equal to item name, because it's not going to just give that in the cart as at the top of the column, I should say. So this would at least add some accessibility there to say, what is this about? And then we'll have item.name and the curly brace. Now I can copy this one down, Shift Alt and the down arrow. And now this is going to be a price per item column. And here we will have a format once again to get our new international number. So it will say new intl dot number format. And then after that, we need a parentheses, and we will have our en-us. Remember, you could change this if you want to. The style, once again, is currency. And then we set the currency property here to USD. And then after that, we still need to chain on our format. And inside of this, we're going to pass the item.price. So we're formatting the item price to the currency that we want to format it to. Okay, after those, we're going to have a label, and this is going to have a class of off screen. So we will not see this on the screen. And it has an HTML4, and this needs to be for item quantity. And that's what we're going to set here between. So we'll just say item quantity. Now, after we do that, we of course need to provide that select element that this is for. So select, and this has a class name of cart2_select. Press tab, and you can see it has several other things it knows we need. One is the name, which we could just use the same item quantity. We wouldn't even have to provide the name if we don't want to, but it's not a bad habit. Here, the ID needs to match the HTML4, so we have item quantity there, and the cart select, but we have a couple of other things we want to set. And so I'm just actually going to put these on separate lines, and it's easier to read this way too as we go down. So here are the three things we currently have, but we want a few more in here as well. So I'll move this over, scroll up. So we've got name, ID, class name. We want a value already set, and this needs to be the item.quantity. After that, we're going to put an aria label and set this equal to item quantity. And then let's put an onChange, and let's go ahead and call our onChange quantity function. Now, inside of the select here, and I could just move this back up as we close it out, we want to put in the options that we created above. Okay, two more columns to go for our cart line items. So I'm going to scroll for some more room again, and this is just going to be a div with a class of cart2_item-subtotal. Press tab, and we've got that, but now, as far as what goes inside of the div or the other attributes, let's go ahead and add the other attributes first. It would be an aria-label, and I'll set this equal to line item. Let me go ahead and change that to a capital line item subtotal. And then after that, inside of this, we're going to have another format with that new international formatting here. So I'm going to copy this because a lot of it will be the same. Come down here and put it here where the curly braces are. There we go. And now what we're formatting is the line total instead of the item price. So I'm just going to pass in the line total that we got above. We already defined that up here when we multiplied that, a simple little equation. And so now we have that formatted, and the final thing we need is a button, just in case we want to remove from the cart. So this would have cart2_button, but it's going to have a few other attributes. I have been told I pronounced that incorrectly. One thing I want to do is just put a red X on there, and I've got the emoji for it. I believe I got it at emojipedia.com. You could find an emoji you want or put something else, but that really indicates you're going to delete the item. Okay, so after that, I'll break these out onto separate lines as well. So after class name, we're going to add an aria-label here, set this equal to remove item from cart. Then we'll have a title for the button, and we'll once again just say remove item from cart. This one should show up if you mouse over the button as well. And then finally, we'll have our on click. We'll set this equal to on remove from cart. And once we save that, we should pretty much be complete as far as the line items are concerned. And then we would return the content we defined right here. Let's scroll up to make sure all of that looks correct. We define the content, and yes, everything's looking good. So I think we've got it all. Now let's go ahead and drag this back over and see if we can add an item or two. This is the current one, so I'll add this item in cart. That's good. I'll add this one. A couple of items in the cart. Let's scroll down. Our footer looks good as well. Let's look at the cart. So now we have our widget and our premium widget both added, and we have just one of each for a total of 2 items and a total price here. Let's change this now to 10 items. And yes, now we have a total of 11 items. And we're not seeing some of the columns just because of how I've got the CSS. But once we have a wider screen, we'll see more of those columns. So now you can see our subtotal here just for this line item is 99.90. And now we see the images as well. Now when I drag this back over to a smaller screen, it eliminates some of that so it can go ahead and fit. So that's why we were missing some of those before. We can change those items here. We can go ahead and delete an item if we want to. We can go back and view products, add more to cart. We can continue to click this and notice the numbers go up here in the header and in the footer as I add more items. Now let's go back and view the cart. Now notice we've got a 28 here, where before this maxes out at 20, but we set that to equal the highest number, the highest quantity, and that's completely off the screen when it drops down, but it is 28 when we do that. So there you go. And of course we can place the order and it just clears out the cart. So everything's as it should be. That really completes the project unless you want to go ahead and add some optimization. So I want to go ahead and add some optimization with Memo from React, and we can do that to the cart line items. We can also do it to the product. So since we're on the cart line item, let's start there. Now at the top, we've already brought in the change event and React elements. So let's bring in Memo as well. Here it is. So we're going to import Memo, and now we'll use it below. So let's go ahead and scroll all the way down. Sometimes you see it as react.memo, but we don't need that if we just import memo. So what I'm going to do, instead of this export default cart line item, I'm going to create a memoized cart line item. So I'll say const memoized cart line item. I'm going to set this equal to memo. And now here, this is going to be a type of cart line item. And now what we'll pass in is the cart line item component itself, but it also takes a function, and we're going to need that function to make this work correctly. We also want to have the default export now be the memoized component. So you really need a function here to see if the items are equal, because we're passing in an item object, and that object will never have referential equality. It would always be a new object as it's passed in. So we need to create the function that will compare. So let's do that above. I'll just say function, and I'm going to say are items equal. Now this is going to receive the item, and we'll say previous item is what we're going to rename it essentially. And then we're going to have props type. And if you remember, we already defined that props type above. So we have that, and then we're also going to have the item, and we're going to define next item. And this would also be the props type. Okay, after that, we'll have our function below. So what we're getting here is the previous item we're going to use and the next item. And that's what you would typically have in a function. We're getting both of those from the item object. Now this gives us a chance to use one more thing we went over in the TypeScript series as well as we compare these objects. So I'll start the comparison here. I'll say return, and it's going to be object.keys. I'll pass in the previous item, and now we'll say .every, because object.keys will give us an array of those keys. So for every key, now we have our function here, and we're going to return previous item. And now we'll have a problem here if we just say key. TypeScript won't like that, but we can say as key of cart item type. And TypeScript's okay with that. So we did have a video on that in the series, and we're using an assertion here. And we're using this key as key of cart item type, so it identifies it for TypeScript. Then we can say if it is strict equals, that's 3 equal signs there. Once again, I'm using font ligatures, so you see it all linked, but it's 3 equal signs. If it equals the next item, and once again, we have to say key as key of cart item type. And now that's good. So we're comparing every key the previous, and the next, essentially. So we're making sure that they're the same. And if all of the keys are the same, we're going to go ahead and be returning true for our items equal, because that's the one thing, the one prop we were essentially concerned with passing in. If we look all the way back up here, dispatch already has referential equality. Reducer actions we have already memoized in the context. So we're not worried about either one of those. But the item object, that was our problem. So we just need to compare and make sure all of those values in the object are equal. And if they are equal, then we're good. So we need to use this function, and memo accepts the function as the second parameter there, the second argument actually that we pass in. And now if I save, we should be good. And now you could use React Dev Tools to see if it re-renders, and it shouldn't re-render. It should only render the cart line item that you change. Of course, it will render all of the line items first when you display the cart, but after that, if you change the quantity of one of the cart line items, the others should not re-render, and you should be able to see that in React Dev Tools. Now, I should leave this for you to do as a challenge, but let's just go ahead and do it to the product component as well. So at the top, we already brought in React Element. Let's also bring in memo there as well. Now we'll scroll down to the bottom, and we want a memoized product. So we'll say const, and then we'll say memoized product, going to equal memo. It's going to be a type of product. And then we're going to pass in the product, but we also need our isEqual function essentially. But when we default, we need to remember that we're also going to default export or export default the memoized product and not the product itself. I spelled something wrong. There we go. Memoized product. That's another nice thing about TypeScript. It told me right away, hey, I did not recognize what you typed. So now memoized product is being exported. We've got this. We need to create our comparison function though, our isEquals. And so what we want here is function. Let me scroll up once again. I'm going to say our products equal. And then this is going to have a product that is received, but we want the previous product. That's what I am naming this. And then in cart, and this is a previous in cart that we can compare to. So we're not just comparing the product object, we're also comparing the in cart value. We're making sure that all of those are the same. Then we can say that's from the props type here. And then after that, we can once again have product, and this is going to be the next product. And then we would also have in cart, and we're going to name this the next in cart. And once again, the type here is the props type. Okay, now we're ready to define the inside of the function. So we have our curly braces. We're going to return, and let me just use parentheses, and I will have object.keys, pass in the previous product object. Once again, for every key, have our arrow, and inside this function, we will return the previous product, and here we'll have key as key of product type. Now, if this is confusing, also don't just look at the assertions chapter in this series, look at the index signatures chapter as well. And that's where we went over a lot of the detail on this and why you need to do this. Then we'll have next product, and we'll say key as key of product type. So we're comparing, once again, all of those values in there. But remember, we also have the in cart. So after we've done all of this comparison, we need to go ahead and add. So I'm going to say, well, what I need here is after we've compared this, I need to put it right here and say, and with double ampersand, previous in cart equals next in cart. And if you remember, if we scroll up and look at that, the in cart is just a Boolean. So there's no real magic there. There's nothing we need to turn into an array and compare. We're just doing a straight up comparison. But that is our products equal function or are memoizing our product component. So we also need to pass it into memo as it accepts that there is the second argument. And now you could do the same thing when you go ahead and add to cart, and then you could see if it re-renders every product or if it just renders the single product. And it should only be the single product when you make a change like that. Okay, I'll drag this over and let's look at our project in the full screen, and everything is complete. We can add items to the cart like we talked about. We can look at all of those items in the cart here. We can go to add more quantities of things as well. And everything looks just fine. So I hope you enjoyed this project and this TypeScript series and learned more about TypeScript and React along the way. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.